Well, welcome to everybody who's watching live, and also to those who may be watching the recording of this A4Q Summit Edition 2025. I am delighted to have with me the absolutely delightful Fran O'Hara. Hello, Fran.
Hey, Debbie, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm really good. Fran, it's always really, really great to hear you speak, so I'm not going to take up too much time and get off the stage as soon as I possibly can. Just want to say to people, please do put questions into the comments box. We'll try our best to answer, but we may not be able to get to all of them, and we'll try to come back later on if we have to. Also, just to remind people that we will be voting for the best presentation, best speaker of this year's summit. So if people do want to vote for Fran, then please go to his profile on the A4Q Testing Summit website, and you'll be able to do that at the end. For now, I'm going to get off stage and hand over to Fran. So sit back, everybody, and enjoy another session. Fran, over to you.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Debbie. I think delightful is the phrase I should use for you. So thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to Testing Summit for inviting me to speak here. I'm honored to speak. So I'm really looking forward to it. And just by way of explanation, I wasn't fighting at the street corner last night. I had a little sister move, so it looks worse than it is in terms of my black eye. But okay, apart from that, yeah, all good. So I'll get started. So you see my screen there?
It's on its way here.
Okay, let's get started. So there's the title of my talk. It's the intersection of my three favorite topics at the moment: Agile in general, and testing, and also Gen AI. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, specifically around the Agile test management side of things. So there's the agenda. I'm literally going to have a slide or two on each of the first four topics: Agile test management, Gen AI, prompt engineering, and some of the challenges to bear in mind with all this. And then I'm going to try and show a few examples, use cases around using Gen AI, large language models, in support of some of your test management activities in an Agile context. Yeah, so let's get started. Agile test management. So literally a single slide. In terms of, if I was going to show one slide, this is it. This is the testing quadrants from Brian Marek, and this version here is being updated by Lisa Crispin and Janet Gregory. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but I'd suggest you have a look at Lisa and Janet's book or books that really expand on this and give case studies. Very valuable. But in a nutshell, it's a mixture of, say, test levels, test types, techniques. It's a thinking tool. It's a model. It's a thinking tool for an Agile test strategy. And, it breaks it up into more techie type tests at the bottom two quadrants, more business facing that could be understood by business people at the top, critiquing the product on the right, guiding development on the left. A lot of automation in quadrant one, a fair bit in quadrant two, but a mix maybe of manual two, quadrant three, mainly manual, and quadrant four, the use of tools, a lot of the utilities. So quadrant one, mainly developers doing kind of low-level unit test, integration tests, and potentially using static analyzers, code reviews. And then quadrant two, very much about story level type testing, functional stuff and so on. Quadrant three, more into exploratory, critiquing the product, looking at workflows, usability, UAT, all that. And then if you're into a DevOps context and continuous deployment and so on, monitoring observability being big issues there. And then into your non-functional stuff like security. So this is strategy stuff, but obviously then strategy feeds into planning. And the little diagram on the top left there kind of just shows, let's say you've got a number of sprints, and then you're looking maybe at the overall, it's important to have a couple of levels here when we think about strategy and planning. There's the big picture in terms of what our overall product backlog is that we're planning to deliver. Maybe we are doing kind of daily deployments, but turning on features on an as-needed basis. Maybe we're planning for release in 3 months' time, and we're working incrementally towards that and getting feedback from our stakeholders along the way. But whatever, we have a kind of a concept of what we're trying to do. We have a product goal potentially associated with our product backlog, and then we're going to figure out how we test this. What's the approach we're going to take? What's the strategy? So that higher level, longer term, obviously this model here can be useful it's wrong for you, so you need to interpret it to your context. Some of the stuff won't be relevant, and there'll be stuff that's missing from this that you need to add. So it's a good thinking tool in relation to an agile test strategy. And in the little hours there are meant to represent, of course, when you come to each sprint and you're planning each sprint, you've got to look specifically at the stories you're pulling into that sprint and their associated risks and so on in relation to planning the testing and the testing activities you're going to do to mitigate those risks against those user stories, and drawing from, story acceptance tests, and maybe you're using acceptance TDD or BDD type approaches and using exploratory testing and so on. Again, whole team type stuff. Have a look at Janet Gregory and Lisa Crispin's. Yeah, so there's agile test management in a single slide. Let's look at Gen AI then. So here I've got this from Tarek King, a nice graphic from him. And it really just shows the relationship, I guess, between these different terms. Okay, AI is the broad field of computer science, where we try to get software to kind of learn and reason like humans, intelligently. And then machine learning then is like a subset of that. And it deals with kind of the programming model. So the traditional programming model is you give a computer step-by-step instructions in an imperative manner to actually do something. Whereas machine learning programming uses algorithms which enable the machine to kind of learn from data examples rather than hard-coded instructions. So that's the kind of the paradigm shift that's kind of going on here with machine learning. And deep learning then is a subset of that, again, which deals with large scale kind of, computation and learning. So here we're talking about training neural networks that have many, many layers using kind of these large, huge data sets. So neural networks themselves are, a kind of a class of models inspired by the brain, and consisting of layers of interconnected nodes or neurons that process input data and adjust internal weights kind of through training. And they're designed to recognize patterns and learn relationships and so on with data. Gen AI then, again, a subset of that, is where, as the name suggests, you're generating kind of new content. It's capable of creating new content. So new data in the form of text and images and audio and code and so on that resembles kind of human created content. So again, powered by architectures like transformers and so on, deep learning models based on transformers. And then finally we come to what we're going to be looking at more is large language models. And Gen AI models for language, trains on massive amounts of text, the internet basically, to understand and generate human-like language. And as I mentioned, Tarek King, acknowledged for the graphic. So there's the kind of the narrative around an LLM, the large language model like ChatGPT and so on. And I've kind of talked to that really already, so I won't repeat. Obviously, then the applications of this, in terms of natural language processing, that last bullet there, that's where you summarize, you can translate, you can have a conversation, with the likes of ChatGPT, create code, whatever. And so, the most kind of well-known ones would be ChatGPT and Gemini from Google, and Llama, Claude from Anthropic, and more recently DeepSeek as well. So these are also just many, many more, but these are maybe some of the more common ones you might be familiar with. So a quick intro to Gen AI. Now we're going to do a quick intro to prompt engineering, because what I want to get to are kind of the examples. So like when I look at the examples, I'm not kind of suggesting that this is the way you should do it. I'm trying just to illustrate, how you can experiment with this in the context of agile test management. But I just want to set the scene obviously here in terms of talking about, I'm going to show some different kind of prompts and prompting techniques and so on, again, in the context of an agile test management. So, what's a prompt? Like a prompt for a large language model, as I've shown in the diagram, is the input, basically, a text input typically that initiates the conversation with the large language model, triggers a response from the model. It can take other forms, and we're going to look at some of those other forms where we can put in an image. It can also take audio these days as well. So we have multimodal large language models that are more in that Gen AI space. But as we know, kind of natural language is often very ambiguous and unclear and imprecise. So that, the models are very sensitive to the phrasing and the formatting and context and so on. So therefore, prompt engineering, is that process of designing and optimizing these input prompts, to effectively guide the large language model's response. So it's crafting prompts, clear, concise, contextually aware, and so on, to give you the kind of outputs to help you achieve your goals. So you start with what's your problem, and what is it that you want the model to help you with, to help you solve, and maybe, you could solve the problem in a different way. So it's always about starting what is the problem that you're trying to address here. And so there's a little prompt: generate 5 test cases for a login form, username, password fields. Not a great prompt, because where's the context? We want to let it know what kind of application we're talking about, how important is security to us, and so on, what kind of risks have we got. So, but it is an example of a prompt. It's an interaction, it's an input that we give to an LLM. But there are techniques we're going to have a look at, excuse me, and practice, such as few-shot prompting, chain of thought, and so on. We won't really touch into the system level stuff. But when it comes to developing prompts, it's an iterative process. That's something to bear in mind as we go through here. And also, in your context, it's going to be very much about experimenting to see what works best for you in terms of prompts and use of techniques, and ultimately then the structure of prompts that you might put into a prompt library that is, prompts that have been shown to be very useful in your context to generate test cases or whatever it is. Yeah. But obviously prompt engineering, the word engineering, it goes further than just prompting, and includes things like, improving kind of the safe use of these models and augmenting them with domain knowledge and RAG and so on, retrieval augmented generation, and other tools, to help, add more context and get more value out of them. And obviously people get into interfacing through the API rather than through the kind of the user interface. So in terms of the techniques then, let me see, in terms of the techniques, here's just a smattering of some of the more common ones. I'm not going to go through all of this in detail. I just wanted to kind of give you a bit of a view on it. Like your basic one obviously is just giving an instruction to the large language model. Give it a command, ask it a question, that type of thing, get an interaction, get it going, get a response. The persona kind of technique is where you're asking the model to adopt a specific role or perspective or persona. And in some cases, like in the previous one, generate some test cases for a login. Like there's not much addition value you're going to get from saying I'm a tester, or sorry, act as a tester and generate some test cases for a login. It's pretty obvious. But in other situations, it can be very useful and powerful. Even, for example, if I'm asking for a review or a set of issues or risks associated with the product backlog, if I take on the role of if I ask the LLM to take on the perspective and role of say a non-technical tester, the risks I'm going to get aren't going to be that technical. Whereas if I ask it as a developer or indeed a cross-functional Scrum team, I'm going to get that mix of maybe more technical risks associated, maybe based on the architecture and so on. So it can very much influence the kind of response you get and the content of that response, And then the idea of shotgun prompting, 0 shot means you give no examples, right? Single shot, you give one example. Few shot, you give a number, right? And here we're basically trying to, to improve the response in terms of getting it to follow kind of examples and generalize based on the examples that we give it. But we do have to be careful with this. There are a number of risks associated with it, in terms of maybe small variations in the examples, or the order even of examples can give different results. And maybe if those examples aren't representative, it won't be able to generalize very well. So we do have to be careful with it, but it can be very powerful to get more consistency. Yeah. Chain of thought then is a very kind of important one. It's where we kind of explicitly request the large language model to do step-by-step reasoning. And so we just add to the prompt things like, let's think step by step, or explain your reasoning. So it improves the performance, particularly for maths. LLMs aren't very good at maths. So it particularly improves the performance for that, for complex stuff, complex decision making, scenario analysis. So there are, there are reasoning models that are coming more and more out. Like with ChatGPT, we'll have a look at some of them, like O3 rather than 4.0. Is a reasoning model, and even with them though, they have the capability to maybe perform stronger kind of reasoning approaches, but encouraging them to do that actually will give better results. So it also improves transparency. We can see these reasoning steps and gives you more reliable output. So it's quite a strong one in terms of a technique. Obviously, we can combine these techniques as well. We could combine chain of thought with few-shot prompting, for example. In general, the prompting, can be very iterative. We can refine the prompt based on previous outputs. And when we get something, we might go, okay, well, give me a bit more detail on that, or actually change that a bit and refine it, and so on. So we interact. It's dialogue driven. It's conversational. We can decompose stuff. We can break large tasks into smaller, more manageable ones. There's a little example there. Instead of saying list test for profile management, we break it up. And that can be useful in for example, feature slicing and so on. And then prompt chaining or threading, may describe deliberate chaining of prompts, to manage content or guide the model through a complex workflow. And maybe for each step, we use the output from the previous step as input to the next. So these are just some examples of the prompting techniques that potentially can really improve the output you get from these LLMs to help you kind of achieve your goals and solve your problems. Yeah. But now challenges, of course, like, you don't get a free lunch here in terms of, there's a whole bunch of challenges associated with using LLMs. There are, in the first instance, for organizations, there's going to be issues around IP and security and privacy and data and so on. So, from the point of view of experimenting, you've obviously got to do this in a responsible way. Your organization may have security policies, so you'd obviously need to follow them. They may, and one way to obviously help address this is to locally host, deployment of an LLM, rather than have it just access to a public LLM. Obviously prompt moderating, filtering as well, and so on. So these are ways that organizations try and address some of these challenges around security, privacy, IP, and so on. Excuse me. So reliance on the quality of data input, obviously wrong input gives the wrong answer. But the thing about LLM, sometimes correct inputs don't guarantee the right answer. And that's what the whole prompting techniques and prompt engineering is about, trying to address that challenge as well. And they can be wrong, particularly around maths, they tell you an answer that's actually wrong. So that's why chain of thought can be useful. We get it to reason, and you tend to get better results then when you kind of use chain of thought around mathematical kind of calculations. So they can hallucinate and just come up with stuff, invent stuff, and it can sound very convincing, like authoritative almost. So you've got to, there is a challenge then to verify, particularly when we get a lot of output from these models. These tools, basically, maintaining timely output verification. And they're non-deterministic, so you ask the same question twice, you get two different answers, Again, prompting is where we try and control the model and its output, is helping to try and make it a bit more deterministic and predictable. And, so prompting that's one of the things we're trying to do with effective prompting. But also we can play around with system parameters like temperature, to kind of make the responses a bit more deterministic, a bit less creative, put it that way. And then obviously there's need for upskilling, training people, the absence of genuine domain expertise. So again, we can use prompting, but also more sophisticated prompt engineering strategies around RAG and so on. Limited contextual comprehension, again, the same thing. And unwanted bias, again, we've got to be cognizant of that, whether it's gender, racial, geographical. Again, we've got to be careful with that in terms of data, for example, data generation that we might use the LLMs for. We need to be kind of cognizant of that. And measuring productivity gains, then, okay, we may a good approach to take with all this is experimentation. But in terms of actually, having a case for the adoption of certain approaches, you want to be able to try and show that they really are going to give you benefits. There's a lot of hype out there. So again, that isn't trivial. you know, trying to measure productivity as such, and the improvements, faster output as well, doesn't necessarily mean better results. Yeah. So there are plenty of challenges, and from a testing point of view, you know, the models lack genuine understanding. You know, they do, it's pattern matching, predictive stuff rather than true comprehension, even though they sound like, you know, they have this, you know, human intelligence, you know, and as a result you can get misleading inputs that seem plausible but, you know, ultimately flawed or irrelevant or very generic and not that useful. So, you know, we need this effective prompting, we need human oversight. Yeah. You know, and testers are essential for interpreting, validating, and contextualizing these outputs, you know. So we need this balanced approach. We need AI assisted, is a great phrase, as is human in the loop. These are some of the phrases that are, I think, very important to take on board. It's a collaborative thing. You can look at them as a very intelligent intern, right? So you can't just trust them to go off and develop your system. They're very intelligent. They have a lot of knowledge, but, you know, do they really have your domain expertise and so on? You know, partnering with them as such, you know, brainstorming with the LLM. These are kind of ways that can be very powerful, you know. And have a look at Michael Bolton's thinking and his LinkedIn's and so on. He's got some, you know, he's got some important ideas that need to be kept on board with this whole AI drive. Yeah, it's inevitable. You know, we need to get into it. We need to be looking at how it's going to add value, but we also need to be careful about the, you know, the risk of displacing critical thinking, which is a big thing Michael talks about. You know, over reliance on them for generating your test artifacts, you know, can result in this decline in critical thinking and analytical skills among testers. You know, and you know, that process of developing tests is really important. It's important as the tests themselves to give you deeper understanding. So we don't want to outsource that thinking to an LLM. We want to be very careful about how we use it. These are some of the challenges. So let's look at a couple of examples. So I just got a little case study here. It's for a cinema website. I've just got the case study is simply a product backlog that I've created. And this is the goal of this minimal viable product, is to enable cinema goers to seamlessly discover, browse, and book films at their preferred cinema through this kind of user-friendly, location-aware web platform. Give you personalized search, real-time scheduling, create accounts, secure bookings, all that. Yeah. So let me show you my little backlog. It's very minimalistic. And I've got a number of features in here. I have it in a spreadsheet, and I've got the feature name, for example, geo-aware cinema location detection and selection. So it automatically detects user location and selects selects the nearest cinema to you, but also allows manual selection to personalize. So a couple of user stories then refined from that overall feature. As a user, I want the system to detect my location so I can quickly find the nearest cinema with a few acceptance criteria. Maybe you're prompted for location permission first, and then if allowed, the nearest cinema is displayed. If denied, you flip to manual location selectors presented. And the other story is about that, and you can search and select from a list or a map, and it's stored for the session duration, and so on. There's a number of them here, like the film details page here provides detailed information about the films, including trailers, cast, reviews. So as a user, I want to view the detailed film information so I can decide whether to watch it. The page, the acceptance criteria, a bit more detailed then. The page includes, you know, synopsis, trailers, cast, directors, user reviews as well. The trailer plays in line without redirecting, and so on and so on. So there's about, as I say, there's about 10 features here. Each of these features has at least one, sometimes a number of user stories associated with it. Seat selection is another one there. Payment gateway, so we get secure payments, ticket delivery then. And then there's also a min feature, so that there's a min function there, so to manage the film listings and so on, and the screens and so on. And then a few non-functional features in there as well. So around security, usability, for example, enabling intuitive use of the platform for all users is the overall feature. More specifically, as a first-time user, I want the site to be intuitive so I can complete a booking quickly. We want to make that more concrete. So, for example, the booking can be completed within 5 steps. And we got tips and inline help is provided. Again, very, just very high level, very minimalistic, just giving the kind of some of the key kind of features of such a backlog. And in the real world, some of these stories are epics. They'd be broken down into much smaller stories that would be in the order of a few days' effort to fully develop and test. Yeah. So if I go look now at ChatGPT, I'm in the first one. These are a couple of examples I prepared. One of them is just a starting point here. I've uploaded using the add photos and files feature. I've uploaded that backlog. Here's my first prompt: provide a brief description of the Sim MVP, highlighting its key features, and it gives me a description there. And I could probably compare that with my product goal and ensure it aligns. So again, this is one of the things that the LLMs are good at, summarizing. Then I give it a prompt. And first of all, I'm using Markdown here. That's a kind of a common way to structure your prompts. First of all, in terms of headings, so it's very clear to you and to the LLM what it is that you're providing. Here I'm providing a goal, a context, a role, the input, and so on. I'm giving it the specific instructions. You could have response format, so you can have it. There's just templates, that you can experiment with to see which ones suit you. But here's one example anyway, where I have a few elements in it. So I'm saying, I'm part of a newly formed Scrum team. From a test management perspective, I want to let me identify concerns with this, uncertainties around this MVP. I'm trying to get to my head around it. I'm trying to understand, is there anything missing here? What are the implications of what's in here? I'm starting to think in terms of my, I'm going to have to come up with a strategy to test this. So I've kind of done a thing here where I've flipped the interaction. The role, I'm asking the LLM to play the role of a CTO. And I wanted to then, the instructions would be to review and analyze the content of that backlog and then ask me questions. So rather than me driving it, I'm asking the LLM to drive it. So I'm asking the LLM to ask me questions based on that role. And then I'm also directing the interaction. I'm saying, ask me if I want to continue to the next question or what, and when I say stop. And I'm also kind of saying, this is a tip I got from Rahul Verma. If you don't want to have a lot of the preamble and the post stuff that the LLM often gives you, just say something like that. No intro, outro. So then it asked me a question: what assumptions, if any, have been made regarding third-party integrations for payment processing? And our test environment's already available for these. And I'm just going to say continue, to these questions, just to show you the kind of thing that it would ask. Feature one, geo-aware. What fallback behavior is expected if a user denies location permission, then fails to select the location manually? So it's asking questions about the functionality, but it's also asking questions about where you're going to get the data for showtime information, how frequently are updates expected. So it's just getting me to think. It's prodding me. It's asking potentially interesting questions. Some of them may not be, but some of them may trigger something. And if I get one useful thing out of some of these questions, it's only taken me a few minutes to do this. So anyway, at some point I stopped. It even asked me questions around usability and so on. Anyway, it just shows one interaction, get us started. Next one, let's have a look at risk analysis. Okay, so I've got this product backlog and I want to do high-level risk analysis to feed into my risk-based agile testing strategy or approach. Yeah. So again, I've uploaded the backlog. I've got a template here for a prompt with goal, context, role. Sorry, instructions is in there as well. And I've stepped the instructions and then I've asked for a particular response format. I could have gone further with the markdown and formatted that way, but I just gave it the headers of the columns. Anyway, what am I doing here? I want to develop, the goal is to develop a kind of a set of quality or product risks that are prioritized, used as a basis for my risk-based testing approach or strategy for the team. I'm part of a newly formed Scrum team again. We're brainstorming quality-related risks for this MVP. So I'm asking the LLM to act as a cross-functional Scrum team. So, all those different perspectives are going to be brought to bear, rather than, let's say, just a, non-technical tester or whatever perspective. And I'm also asking it to pay particular attention from a product owner's point of view as well, in relation to risks that could threaten the value and valuable outcomes from this product backlog. So I wanted to analyze it. I wanted to create a list of quality risks for each feature, including the NFOs. I'm asking it to identify 3 to 4 risks per feature. Now, that could be overly restricted, and it probably is. So if you have too few in general, you're asking for too few examples, or the output is too constrained, then you potentially are missing out on important risks. If you ask for too many, you're kind of almost encouraging the LLM to hallucinate and make up those last few. So again, this would be something you'd experiment with. And then I'm asking for more detail, maybe around the more significant risks. I wanted to assess impact and likelihood on a scale of 1 to 10, and then I wanted to multiply the two together to give me a relative priority. And there's the template that I want in terms of the response format. There's a template for the response format. Now, I've used O4 Mini here. I could have used O3 as a reasoning model. I tend to see that the reasoning models are better at more complex scenario-based problems. But again, I've got things step by step in there. So I'm using kind of I'm spelling out the steps. I'm asking it to reason through its approach. I'm using the persona pattern here as well. I'm also then using Markdown and defining the response format that I want. And it comes up then with a whole bunch of risks associated with each of the features. And for example, the GeoWare cinema location API fails or returns the wrong coordinates, causing the wrong nearest cinema listings. It gives you Dublin rather than Belfast type of thing. Permission prompt is blocked or overlooked, so the manual selector never appears. The user is stuck. The manual selector isn't intuitive, so you get no selection, no listings, lost conversions. Latency is added based on the geolocation, causing performance complaints, which is an interesting one. And so we could look at, say, the film display. Let's have a look at that one. Sorry, the film detail page. Embedded trailer fails to play in line, forcing redirects, slow load up of high-res posters, whatever. Cast or review section missing data schema. Reviews not sanitized, so you get cross-site scripting, injection risks maybe from malicious user content. It's a bit of a security one associated with that. And so on, even for, let's say, usability here. Booking flow exceeds the 5-step due to hidden validations. You get a drop-off rate there increasing. Tooltips or overlap or obstruct the UI and small screens, so again, the screen size, users ignore the help. Inline help content is outdated compared to the actual live features, causing confusion. And again, this might inform your testing based on some of the risks. But again, this is not a substitute. You're not outsourcing your thinking about risk. This is just a brainstorming partner that's coming up with some ideas for you to evaluate and potentially use. Now, the other way you could do this is you come up with your set of risks, either as an individual, as a team, whatever, and then you use the LLM to critique it. And potentially see and add to that list that you come up with yourself. So I've exported this into an Excel spreadsheet. I then go to strategy. Okay, so what I'm going to upload here is this risk assessment as well as the product backlog. I'm also uploading that slide. It's an image. It can handle that. And I'm uploading the slide on the quadrants. And the goal is to develop a risk-based strategy. A risk-based strategy. For the cinema MVP, and I've uploaded those 3 items, the personas, the Scrum team. So here I'm going to do some effectively prompt chaining within a single prompt. So I wanted to provide a checklist of items to define as part of developing a test strategy. So I want a checklist first, and then I wanted to use the checklist to come up with the strategy. And then I wanted to use the strategy to come up with the plan. Okay, so I normally would do this as 3 separate prompts in terms of prompt chaining. Here I've just put it into one. And I ask it to ask me the question, do I want to continue or revise the list? So these are like milestone checkpoints that I can put in as well. And I can revise the checklist so that it actually considers different things maybe when it actually goes to create a sample agile test strategy for the cinema MVP. But here I'm actually saying, a lot of organizations I see aren't doing pure agile. They're using some kind of hybrid. Sometimes there's regulatory reasons why they need more documentation, or sometimes they've got a safe implementation where there's a lot of longer term planning going on. So anyway, I've used a blend here. I've just experimented with the idea of using a strategy and plan based on 29119, the software testing standard. Part 3 is around the documentation and templates around strategies and plans. But I've also asked it to combine that with items in the Agile testing quadrants. Again, just to see what it comes up with. Now, in your situation, you may use one or the other or your own version of it. And then I ask it to use the checklist to basically come up with an Agile test strategy based on those checklist items. So it comes up with a checklist, and the scope and objectives, risk identification, test levels, and mapping the quadrants, types in terms of what's going to be automated, exploratory charters, accessibility is mentioned in there as well, traceability coverage, tools automation, what you're going to use at the different levels, maybe the CI/CD integration, environments and data, role responsibilities, entry exit, how it aligns the schedule, how the testing is going to align with the sprints, importing metrics, monitoring observability. So there's a checklist, and then I ask it to continue and basically apply that checklist to my MVP. And so therefore it comes up with, well, scope is what's in scope, well, the various functional and the 94s as well. And the objectives maybe are to verify key user journeys end-to-end, like location to booking to ticket, mitigate those top business technical risks like the seat map sync and the payment failures. High priority risks maybe being a focus, and it identifies the higher ones from that input I gave it, which it had given me previously. Then it looks at the quadrants, and it talks about the kind of testing you're going to do within each of those. Techniques as well, manual exploratory type stuff, using checklists, traceability, tools, roles, and so on. Yeah. And then I say, okay, go on, put a plan together. And again, it just highlights, these are the key elements of a plan in terms of the test items, features to be tested, features not to be tested, and so on. Test deliverables, cases, so on, automated scripts, traceability matrices, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So again, it's just an example. It's just a use case of how the LLM might support you in the activity that you might be going through in relation to this. Now, I think I'm probably running out of time, so I'll just very quickly show you one other example. Let's say you're in a situation where, you know, you're very far removed from ISO 29119 and ISTQB kind of structured test process, and you're more interested in a context-driven approach. So again, you could use the heuristic test strategy model from James Back and use that as your driver for your Agile test strategy. So just to make sure the LLM knows it, I ask it to explain what it is, and it comes up with the whole description of the heuristic test strategy model, the 4 core sheets in it, as such the elements of it, like project environment, product elements, quality criteria, and techniques. Using it in practice, why Agile teams like it, limitations, further reading. Yeah. And then I want to dive into a bit more detail around the product elements, and it defines, therefore, using the mnemonic there around structure, it's missing the I, structure, function, data, interfaces, platform, and so on. And then let's say how you might use that, idea generation, so on, exploratory charters. And then I say, okay, I give it the MVP, and I say outline a risk strategy focusing on the data element specifically under product elements of the heuristic test strategy model, tailor-made to my MVP. So it comes up with what are the key data domains in my Cinema MVP. It identifies each of those, seat map state, admin edits, the catalog, films, and so on. And then it talks about some of the risks with each of those areas. And then it actually talks about, in terms of a risk-driven test strategy, guiding heuristics that might be useful are the coverage tour, data flow tours, and so on, and techniques mixes for each of those. And then it comes up maybe with a number of charters tailored to that backlog, suggested charters that have a data focus. And these are the missions for each of those kind of charters. Again, just a useful thinking tool. Again, so I was really just trying to show some examples there around using the LLMs. And there's so many more use cases. You could spend a lot more time talking about building quality to the product backlog. You could talk about, obviously, we didn't get to monitoring and control and generating reports and analyzing metrics and charts and so on. Obviously, automation, test case generation, test data generation, using formal approaches, using informal approaches, and exploratory and checklists and heuristics, defect management, and so on. So the list goes on. Okay, I think I've probably run over time there, have I? thanks a lot for listening, and I hope you got a little bit of value out of that.
Fran, thank you so much for that. Very insightful, and as always, lots of practical advice there. So great, thank you. Let's see if we've got some questions. I know there's a couple there. Can you expand a bit on LLM support for test design?
Yeah, obviously test design isn't, strictly speaking, part of test management, but obviously we have to have, in our strategy and planning, we're going to be talking about, well, how are we going to go about designing tests? And in terms of LLM support, obviously we've got the black box techniques, equivalence partitioning, boundaries, state transition, decision, pairwise, all of that. And again, the LLMs can support that. I found that they need a lot of babysitting, basically, in terms of their coming up with what it is you're looking from in terms of test case generation from those black box techniques. For example, when you try equivalence partitioning, it tends to confuse it or combine it with boundary value analysis. So it gives you multiple test cases for partition, including the edge cases, the boundaries. And so you have to, you can experiment with it. You will have to iterate, which was one of the techniques we talked about, to get it to do exactly what you want. And chain of thought, excuse me, is very good there. I'm just being very explicit in the instructions, and few shot in terms of giving some examples of what you're looking for, and being explicit about one test case per equivalence partition and so on. And you also may need to integrate in with some other tooling, maybe, for example, to draw state transition diagrams and things like that. So it's not straightforward, but it's doable in relation to LLM support around black box techniques. But I think on the other side, there's some very powerful support from the point of view of test design and coming up with tests based on maybe more exploratory type of approaches. So, you could even give it a screenshot and ask it to give you a list of tests, come up with a suggested list of tests. You could give it diagrams like flowcharts and more formal diagrams like UML and ask it to suggest a number of tests. You could give it a checklist, for example, a usability checklist, and give it your system and say, okay, come up with some tests based on that usability checklist for my user interface. Design some tests for that. You could give it a defect taxonomy, for example, around security. And there's one that Rahul showed me that I wasn't aware of, that is incredibly powerful. It's the common weakness enumeration, the CWE. It is hundreds of potential failure modes around security. It's a public database that and using the LLM to extract and identify the elements of that might be relevant to your context is quite a useful thing. Potentially, again, you want to verify it, and then to suggest and design tests based on that. And it could just be one-liners, test ideas, whatever. Using James Whitaker's tours and asking it to focus on a certain tour and suggest tests based on that for your system. So, it's your imagination is the only kind of limiting, I think, aspect to this, in terms of the way in which it can really support you in test design.
Thank you for that, Fran. I'm just going to remind everybody, because there's so much in there and so much in the presentation as well, that we will make sure that the recordings of this are available so people can go back and dip in and listen again to what you've been saying. That'll be on the A4Q YouTube channels. So exciting. It's mind-blowing, this stuff and where we've got to. Fran, thank you so much, as always. And thank you to everybody who's tuned in. A reminder, please go to Fran's profile on the A4Q Testing Summit website and cast your votes. And stay tuned, everyone, for the next session, the A4Q Testing Summit Edition 2025.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fran.